Hey, deep divers, welcome back to the show. Today we're tackling neurodiversity.
Ooh, that's a big one.
It is. And we're going deeper than usual. We're looking at the sometimes not so rosy relationship between academic ideas about neurodiversity and, what it's actually like to be autistic.
Yeah, there can be a real disconnect there for sure.
Exactly. So to guide us through this deep dive, we've got Jaime Hoerricks, PhD, and their article, The Great Divide, Academic Neurodiversity versus Autistic Lived Reality.
That title is pretty direct.
No kidding. This article does not hold back, but that's what we're here for, right? To unpack those arguments, understand those critiques, and hopefully come away with a more complete picture of all this.
It's messy.
It is so messy, but also super important. So let's jump right in.
Let's do it.
Okay, first up, Hoerricks tackles this idea of the commodification of neurodiversity.
Okay, I've heard that term thrown around. What does it actually mean?
Well, they're arguing that neurodiversity is being turned into like a profit-driven industry, especially by corporations and universities.
So it's like inclusion is the new hot commodity.
Right, like everyone's trying to get on board, but are they doing it for the right reasons? That's the question Hoerricks is asking.
Makes you think.
It does. So the article really digs into neurodiversity hiring schemes and how these programs often end up prioritizing autistic people who are, really good at masking.
And excluding those who maybe aren't so good at fitting into those corporate molds.
Yeah, it's like, we welcome you, but only if you can blend in.
Which kind of defeats the purpose, doesn't it? The whole point of neurodiversity is that we're different.
It's like, we want your talent, but not your authenticity.
Exactly. And Hoerricks argues that this creates this illusion of progress.
Okay, unpack that one for me. Illusion of progress.
So it's like these surface level changes without actually addressing the deeper systemic issues, like putting a Band-Aid on a broken bone.
Ah, I see. And the article uses the example of universities funding research on autistic people, but then not promoting artistic scholars into leadership positions.
Right. They're happy to study you, but not ready to share power with you.
And to me, that connects back to the acceptable autistic concept. Only certain types of autistic people are allowed to climb the ladder.
It's like they're afraid of what might happen if autistic people are actually in charge.
Interesting point. Hoerricks also calls out those conferences and events that, claim to be about amplifying autistic voices.
But then they charge these fees that are totally inaccessible to many autistic people.
It's like, come share your experiences with us, but only if you can afford it.
So much for inclusion, right?
Right. And that kind of leads into the next point, which I found really fascinating. Hoerricks goes deep on how certain key figures in autism research have been erased from history.
Oh, yeah, like who?
Well, particularly women and people outside of the West. Have you ever heard of Dr. Grunya Sukhareva?
I don't think so.
She was a Jewish-Russian doctor who actually described autism decades before Leo Kanner, the so-called father of autism.
Wow, I had no idea.
It's crazy, right? Like how history gets written and whose voices get amplified and whose gets silenced.
That's messed up.
It is. And the article highlights how Dr. Sukhareva's work focused on supporting and integrating autistic individuals into society, while Kanner's work was influenced by some pretty harmful ideas that were, prevalent in the West at the time. It's like two completely different approaches to understanding autism.
So what was Dr. Sukhareva's approach like?
It seems like she had a much more humanistic approach, focused on acceptance and integration.
It makes you wonder how different things might be today if her work had been, more widely known and accepted.
Yeah, it's like we were on this different path entirely and then took a detour down a much darker road.
And Hoerricks argues that this historical distortion has had a lasting impact on how we view autism today.
Okay, so we've talked about commodification, this illusion of progress, historical erasure, but Hoerricks goes even further, arguing that the systems we live in, like capitalism, ableism, the medical-industrial complex, just can't be reformed to truly include autistic people.
Whoa, that's a big statement.
It is. What are your thoughts on that?
I think there's a valid point there. These systems are built on conformity and productivity, which can be real struggles for many autistic people.
It's like we're asking people to constantly adapt and conform to a world that wasn't designed for them.
Exactly. And then we label them as difficult or disordered when they struggle.
Hoerricks actually uses this term acceptable autistics to describe those who can meet those demands,
while others are left behind.
It makes you think about the true cost of inclusion in a system that's fundamentally built on exclusion.
Yeah, like are we really asking for inclusion or are we asking for assimilation?
Right. And that leads us to Hoerricks' call for an autistic revolution.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about this revolution.
Essentially, they're saying we need to move away from trying to fit into existing systems and start building our own autistic-led spaces and mutual aid networks.
So creating our own world, basically.
Kind of. It's about taking back control of the narrative and saying, we're not waiting for permission to exist anymore.
I love that. But what does that actually look like?
That's a great question. And that's what we'll explore in the next part of our deep dive.
Can't wait.
Stay tuned.
This autistic revolution, it's really about reclaiming that narrative.
Right. Taking back control.
Yeah.
Challenging those dominant, often medicalized perspectives on autism, like the ones that paint it as a problem to be solved.
We're not broken.
Exactly. It's not about fixing us. It's about, creating a world where we can thrive.
It's like that saying, if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a dizzy, it will live its whole life believing that it is stupid. We're always being measured against neurotypical standards.
Yeah, and then we're told we're not good enough when we don't measure up.
It's exhausting trying to constantly mask and camouflage who we really are.
And Hoerricks calls out this obsession with productivity and conformity in our society.
Like our worth is only measured by how well we can fit into this capitalist system.
Which wasn't designed for us in the first place, so how do we break free from that?
Well, Hoerricks suggests that true liberation comes from embracing, the full spectrum of autistic experiences. Even the ones that don't fit neatly into those societal norms.
So celebrating our differences, not trying to erase them.
Right. It's about creating spaces where we can be ourselves without judgment or pressure to conform.
And that's where those autistic-led spaces and mutual aid networks come in, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's about creating a sense of belonging outside of those systems that constantly tell us we're not good enough.
A place where we can support each other, share knowledge, and build a world that actually works for us.
It's powerful.
It is. And Hoerricks also talks about the importance of autistic self-advocacy and activism.
So not just creating safe havens, but also fighting for real systemic change.
Challenging those harmful narratives, demanding recognition, respect, equal opportunities for all autistic people.
And dismantling those barriers that prevent us from fully participating in society.
On our own terms.
Right.
And speaking of dismantling barriers, I think it's important to circle back to that historical erasure we talked about.
Oh yeah, Dr. Sukhareva.
Her story is a prime example of how power dynamics shape our understanding of the world. It's like we've been missing out on this whole other perspective on autism.
One that was more focused on acceptance and support.
Rather than pathology and control. It's pretty frustrating to think about how different things might have been if her work had been taken seriously.
It's like we took a wrong turn somewhere.
But it's not too late to course correct.
Right. Hoerricks' work is helping to bring those hidden histories to light.
And challenge those dominant narratives that have been holding us back for so long.
So we've talked about commodification illusion of progress, autistic-led spaces reclaiming our history. But how do we translate all of this into real-world change?
What can we do to build a more autistic-friendly world?
Well, Hoerricks has some pretty radical proposals. They argue that we need to completely rethink our approach to things like education, healthcare, employment, social support systems.
So not just tweaking things around the edges.
Right. It's about questioning those fundamental assumptions about what's normal and what's acceptable.
Okay, I'm ready. Let's dive into those concrete proposals, starting with education. How does Hoerricks suggest we change things there?
They're advocating for a complete overhaul of the education system. Instead of forcing autistic kids to conform to a neurotypical model, they argue for creating learning environments that celebrate our strengths and, provide the support we need to thrive.
So ditching that whole one-size-fits-all model of education, it never really works for anyone.
Nope. Hoerricks pictures individualized learning, sensory-friendly classrooms, and a curriculum that embraces all those different ways of thinking and learning.
So instead of trying to make everyone the same, we actually celebrate those differences.
Exactly. Imagine a school that actually values neurodiversity.
Yeah.
It would benefit everyone, not just the autistic students.
Right. It challenges the idea of what's normal and creates a space where everyone feels valued.
Okay, so that's education. What about healthcare? How do we revolutionize that?
Well, Hoerricks is calling for a big shift away from the medical model. The one that sees autism as something to be fixed or cured.
Right? We don't need to be fixed.
Right.
We just need support to live full lives.
On our own terms.
Exactly.
And that might look like better access to sensory-friendly spaces.
Communication support.
Yeah.
Mental health services that are actually tailored to autistic people.
Makes sense. And what about employment? How do we make workplaces genuinely embrace neurodiversity?
Well, Hoerricks says we ditch those rigid corporate structures that only value conformity and masking.
Okay, I like where this is going.
Imagine workplaces that are flexible, accommodating, and recognize the unique contributions of neurodivergent people.
It's like instead of be like everyone else if you want to succeed, it's bring your whole self to work.
Let's see what we can accomplish together, right? Think flexible schedules, sensory-friendly workspaces, clear communication guidelines, so you can actually be your authentic self and thrive.
It seems so simple, but so few workplaces actually do it.
And Hoerricks also challenges how we define productivity and success. Those traditional metrics often exclude anyone who thinks or works a little differently.
Because we all know there's more than one way to be successful, right? Neurodiversity brings all these strengths and perspectives to the table.
It's not just about tolerance. It's about embracing those differences as a source of innovation, creativity, resilience.
Makes sense. So we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
Yeah.
What would you say is the biggest takeaway for our listeners today?
I think the main message is this. Listen to autistic people. Challenge the narratives that paint us as deficient, and build a world that truly values neurodiversity.
Not just in theory, but in practice.
Right.
Right. So what can our listeners do to help make that happen?
Educate yourself. Seek out artistic voices and perspectives.
Read our stories. Listen to our experiences.
And then put that knowledge into action. Advocate for inclusive policies. Support organizations led by autistic people.
And most importantly, treat us with respect and dignity.
Recognize our agency. Listen to our needs. Create spaces where we feel safe and empowered.
It's not about charity or pity. It's about building a better world for everyone.
A world that's more just equitable, vibrant. Because it embraces the full spectrum of human experience.
We'll leave you with this final thought. What if, instead of trying to squeeze autistic people into systems designed for someone else, we actually redesign those systems to embrace neurodiversity?
What kind of world could we create if we saw those differences as strengths, not deficits?
Something to think about. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.